Welcome to the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers. There are no traffic jams along the Extra Mile when you're studying for your bar exam. And now, your host, Jackson Mummy, owner of the Celebration Bar Review.
Well, hey everyone, welcome to the Extra Mile podcast. This is episode 66, and this is your host, Jackson Mummy. Glad to have you with me. I got up really early this morning to record this episode, and I'm confronted with barking dogs and crazy people out on the street, and I hope that that doesn't disrupt too much of this recording. I can't seem to win some days. Maybe that's how you feel sometimes with your bar studies. You know, why won't people just be quiet and let me study or do my podcast? Well, there you go. But I am glad that you've taken time out of your day to join me. I think you're going to find today's episode really useful and instructive. We're going to take a deeper dive into one of the aspects of our course called PhotoReading. It's an area that's not very well understood, although we've been using it for a number of years now. But it generates a lot of discussion and a lot of questions. And I thought today I'd try to explain a little bit more about PhotoReading, how it works, what it is, and then some tips for using PhotoReading from the developer of the program, Paul Scheele at Learning Strategies in Minneapolis. So stay with me if you have heard anything about PhotoReading, or maybe you haven't and you just want to know how you could speed up your reading for the bar and improve your comprehension and improve your scores. I've talked a little bit about this in other episodes. Most notably, if you go back to episode 63, I talked about how to raise your multi-state score by 15 points. That was not specifically photo reading, but it incorporated photo reading. So if you haven't heard that episode, be sure to do so. You can go back and check all of our past episodes by going to celebrationbarreview.com. Click on the word podcast at the top, and you'll see all of our past episodes. You can also subscribe from that site, or you can go to iTunes and subscribe there. And we would love your honest ratings and reviews. The podcast has really grown since we started it 65 episodes ago. So really appreciate you being with us. Now, before I get into the meat of our discussion today, I just want to also remind you that on Thursday, I'll be conducting a live free masterclass called How to Make the Next Bar Exam Your Last Bar Exam. This is a 90-minute look at the 4 steps that passing bar takers have to go through in order to be successful on their exam. As I said, it's free, but you do need to register, and you can do that in one of 2 ways. You can go to our website at celebrationbarreview.com. There's a button right there on the front page that says reserve your seat. Just click on that and we'll get you signed up. Or you can text message us, text the phrase next bar exam to 33444. We'll get you set up there. The class will be at 3 p.m. Eastern, 12 noon Pacific time on Thursday, and I really hope you'll join us for that look into what it takes to be successful on the bar. Well, one of the things that I'll talk about in that particular live master class is this idea of photo reading. So let's dig in a little bit and talk first about what photo reading is, and then some ways to make it work more effectively for you if you're using it. Photo reading was first developed by this company, Learning Strategies, out of Minneapolis, and its developer is Paul Scheele, who's a PhD. And it's built on the idea of neurolinguistic programming. The concept behind photo reading is sometimes confused with speed reading, but they're very, very different. In speed reading, you're just trying to read as you normally would, but faster. In photo reading, you're literally bypassing your conscious reading mind for what we call whole mind or pre-conscious mind. And the best way to describe it would be like taking a photograph with your camera or your phone of each page of a document that you're reading. And by doing that, if you would just blinking your eyes as though you're taking a picture, you are processing and putting all of that information into your brain, but not in the place where you normally would find it. In other words, it's not in your conscious brain, it's in your pre-conscious brain. Photo reading was developed and is sold as a separate course by Learning Strategies, and through license with them, we offer photo reading to our students as an option in our course. what we've discovered over the years is that when people photo read rather than conscious reading, their comprehension increases, the reading time drops dramatically. Let me give you an example. One of our multi-state subject matter outlines typically is about 150 pages long. For most people, if they're doing a conscious typical read, it would probably take them somewhere between 6 to 10 hours to read that for the purposes of studying for the bar. If you're photo reading, you can actually read that same material in 30 minutes or less. Now, there are a number of advantages that you can see immediately when that comes up. One is you can read that same outline at 30 minutes many, many times before you've even come close to investing the 10 hours in a single reading of the first material. The second advantage, which may not be as obvious to you, is that a number of studies continue to reinforce the concept and the notion that the slower one reads, the lower their comprehension. The faster you read, actually, the higher your rate of retention and comprehension. And I know that that's counterintuitive for many of you. You've probably grown up thinking, well, I have to go very carefully and read very slowly to understand things. But in point of fact, the slower someone goes in study after study after study, when they're given new information and told to read it, the slower that they go, the lower their comprehension. And so photo reading takes advantage of the way that our brain processes information to give you the ability to gather this information and then process it. Now, one of the misconceptions about photo reading is that it will give you photographic recall. It doesn't do anything like that. I wish they'd come up with another name except photo reading, but that's what it's called. But it's not photographic memory. You will not have a conscious memory recall. You will not be able to see the printed word on the page, word for word, line for line, as though you literally had a photograph in front of you. What you'll have, however, is something much more useful, which is a familiarity and an understanding of the material that you would never gain otherwise, and in fact, probably wouldn't gain even with repeated, slower, conscious readings of the same material. Now, that's pretty remarkable, and it's pretty amazing, and clearly, photo reading has its detractors. There are people that think that it's just a bunch of hooey, to put it nicely. And so when I first investigated photo reading a number of years ago, before I ever introduced it into our course, I tried it myself. And I was skeptical. I mean, I really wasn't all that convinced that it would work. And I went through the same 7 lessons that our students now go through in photo reading. Back then, it wasn't a digitally available course, so I had the old CDs and the hard copy books. But I went through the course, and in each 1-hour introductory lecture, Paul Scheele goes through and explains each step of photo reading, and then you get a chance to practice it. About halfway through the course, there's an interesting exercise in which you've photo read one of your first books, and you are now asked to think of a question that you want to know from that text. And then you're asked to just literally thumb through the pages, just slide your hand as though you're running across the spine of the book almost, flipping open the pages, and put your hand down on the page that would answer that question. Well, I had a couple 100-page book, and I'd read it, and I had some some questions, some things I wanted to know the answers to, and I wasn't sure if photo reading had really worked because I had gone through the process of photo reading, which was literally the process of turning pages, just kind of getting a blank stare on my face and turning pages. And I thought, well, I'm not really sure anything's happening. And I think that's the reaction of most people. Well, at that point, I figured I'd give the exercise a try. And I started thumbing through the book and put my hand down on a page, randomly, it seemed to me, and then looked at the text where my index finger was pointed. It was the precise section of text that answered the question that I had just articulated. Well, at that point, I was a believer, and I've been a believer ever since. And more to the point than just my own experience, I've seen student after student after student raise their scores, particularly on the multi-state, enormously when they use photo reading because they had better understanding of the material. You see, if you've been through law school and you've been studying for the bar, maybe this is your first time, but maybe it's not, and you've been studying and working and focusing, or maybe you've had your own law practice and you've been practicing for a number of years, you have access and a reservoir of information that's huge. that you're not tapping into. And so what photo reading does, as much as the input of material, is the ability to access and get at that material. And in the photo reading course, Paul takes you through how you not only go into the process of actually photo reading, but then what you do after you've read to gain access to the information. And I'm going to share a few of the tips that he has put together for students and make that available to you also in today's show notes. But I think it's important to understand that what photo reading does is simply let your whole brain get a hold of a lot of information and then allow you to extract it. And you might say, well, how would I get all of that information out of my brain? I mean, don't I have to know it? And the answer is that it comes through a process called activation. That once you've gone through this step of photo reading, you then want to activate what you've read, and we'll talk about that in a little more detail in a moment. But that activation through lectures and practice questions and so on helps you retrieve the information. And then when it comes time for the test, if you're taking a multiple choice test, you literally rely on your intuitive sense rather than your conscious processing power. And the reason that you do that is that this is allowing what's in your whole mind, your photo reading mind, to come into play instead of being blocked out. The other great advantage is that if you're writing an essay answer and you're using our writing style, the law that you need to support the arguments that you're writing about will come to you much more naturally, much more easily than when you stop and think, well, what did I memorize, or what's my checklist or my outline here? And so it's a huge paradigm shift in the way that you study and the way you take the test. And we've seen dramatic increases in people's scores, people that had failed multiple times going to passing scores, big jumps, many point jumps in their scores. And you can read about those on our website and on our testimonials page. But my point here today is simply to say that photo reading is a game changer if you're willing to try it. But, and this is a big caveat, in our experience, when people try to photo read on their own outside the context of a course like ours, often they find it discouraging and confusing, and they don't really get enough guidance on their own out in the world to necessarily make it work. I mean, obviously, many people do, but for the purposes of the bar exam, I found that when someone tries to use photo reading outside of a course, it's difficult for them. So we've integrated it into the way that we teach the course, and we found that makes a big difference. Every exam, I have people that come to me who say, you know what, I had bought photo reading on my own from Learning Strategies, couldn't quite make it work, and then we begin to integrate it into the course, and it changes pretty dramatically for them. Well, let me share with you next a couple of ideas from Paul Scheele about photo reading and comprehension, and some tips that he's got for photo readers that I think are really useful. One of the key ideas that Paul talks about is that comprehension should be understood as occurring in layers. It's not a single unified activity. And he says that there are basically 4 levels of comprehension. And working through them, he says that the first level is what he calls awareness that you get from your preview. In other words, knowing the main topic without knowing any details. And most bar takers, I think, pretty much have this intuitively. You know what the subject is that you're going to be reading about, torts or contracts, whatever it might be. You don't know a whole lot of details, but you have some context. The second level of awareness he calls the sense of familiarity. After you've photo read material, what happens is that you will have a feeling, and you say, feelings? I'm a lawyer, we don't deal in feelings. But yeah, actually we do, and part of what happens here is that the whole mind operates on a feeling level much more than it operates on a verbal contextual level. And so when you photo read, you will actually have the feeling that you know the material implicitly. And the reason for that is that what you've done is to expose the details into your mind, just like you've exposed film in a camera. It's a feeling some people describe as having read the material before, but there is no conscious recall of it. And so what Paul describes as an emotional connection to the text is what we want to have happen. And students will say to me, well, I don't think I learned anything. I don't have any conscious recall. And that's accurate. That's not our goal, is to generate conscious recall, because we're not going to use the conscious brain in answering questions. And so, again, this is why you've got to be careful. You don't want to photo read and then go in to take the test as though you've consciously read. You're running on empty at that point in your conscious brain. So you've got to be very careful in how you use this. The third level of comprehension, according to Dr. Scheele, is what he calls knowledge. And this is the explicit knowing information. Now, I think what's going to surprise some of you is that in his research, he believes that somewhere between 4 to only 11% of the text will come at this level of knowledge. So that's a very small amount. If I said to you that you only were going to learn 10% of the text and ask you to pass the bar, you could never do it. And so that explicit knowledge doesn't work that way. And that's why people who try to photo read and then use their conscious brain are in trouble, because they're operating on about 10% of what they should have. So what we actually need to do is to get to the fourth level that he describes as expertise. And expertise, and this is critical, comes not from the reading, but from the application of what you've read into your world, your personal or professional life, and in our case, into your bar review life. So it's the activation and the expertise that actually helps build. And so the reading is a part of that. It's foundational, but it is not everything. Now, I think it's important to understand those levels of comprehension, because too often what I see is that bar students they stop at level 1 or 2 or 3 and say, well, I'm not getting enough out of photo reading. The successful photo readers are the ones that go all the way to the fourth level of expertise. So how does that happen? Well, one of the ways that it occurs is that I've described this new paradigm that you have, but essentially the paradigm is the realization that your non-conscious or your whole mind is an information processor, and your conscious mind, your prefrontal cortex, is the information's manager. And so what happens is that you have to handle information on a non-conscious level first, and you ask your preconscious brain for assistance in guiding you to the details that you need in order to reach your purpose. The way that happens is by your ability to activate the material. Now, as I said, I'll give you the link to an article that Paul wrote about activation, but he was teaching a course in London, England, and he summarized and put together 7 steps to improve activation because he thought it was that important, and I agree with him. And I'm not going to go through all 7 of the tips, but I want to highlight a couple of them that I think make a big difference in this activation, allowing your conscious mind to get a hold of what's in your non-conscious mind. One of the tips that he said was to increase access to the non-conscious mind. And in order to do that, he said that you have to increase connections in the place where the information goes by maintaining a relaxed state of alertness. He said, let go of performance anxiety, a sense of urgency, or the pressure to know it all right away. This is absolutely critical for bar takers. Students say things like, I got to know it all, I got to understand it all, I got to learn it all. And you can hear the tension in their voice when they say it. You can feel it in their words and in their attitude and behavior. This actually hurts the ability to activate. You actually have to be much more relaxed. Forcing the process will frustrate you. Something else that people will say is, I'm going to try to do this, or I'll try to activate this. And that's actually a subconscious command to fail. To our subconscious, there is no try. It's a binary light switch. It's on or off. And remember that the conscious mind is not designed as the information processor, but the manager. So what happens is you want to process the information subconsciously and then manage it consciously. In doing that, you want to be very clear to your subconscious that you are going to activate, not try to activate. So you want to increase your access to that in part by being more relaxed. Another of his tips that I think is very important is to use multiple intelligences. Now, if you've been through our masterclass, you've heard me talk about multiple intelligences. This was a concept that was introduced to the world by Howard Gardner at Harvard's Project Zero. I had the chance to work with Dr. Gardner at Celebration School and to test and work through multiple intelligences in a variety of settings. I believe very strongly as an educator in the use of multiple intelligences. And if you're not familiar with the concept, it simply means that there are a variety of ways that we measure and use intelligence, not just verbal and mathematic. And with photo reading, which is built on that principle, one of the concepts is that you use at least 3 or more of your intelligences when you activate. So the idea is to use your logical intelligence, your linguistic intelligence, perhaps visual spatial, bodily kinesthetic, interpersonal, intrapersonal, naturalist, even musical. And so part of the process of activation is the way that we work with you in the bar in multiple intelligences. Now, that all sounds pretty out there, so let me bring it down to the concrete. The way that we use photo reading at Celebration Bar Review is that we'll have you photo read a piece of material. Then I will actually activate it through the lecture and the process that I use in lecturing. I lecture at a very high rate of speed deliberately in order to get past your conscious brain and get into your non-conscious brain to activate the material. In addition, you will then activate the material again by doing question practice, which will involve really your logical skills. You've already involved some linguistic skills. Now you'll have some bodily kinesthetic, actually working through problems, different ways to activate the material. And then you'll go back and repeat that later in a concept called spaced repetition. So what happens is that in going back and then re-photo reading this material many times, and typically one of our photo reading students will go through an outline and photo read it between 20 to 30 times in the course. And you would never be able to do that or anything close to it if you were doing traditional reading. But they'll do it over a spaced period of time, and each time activating the material. And so when you do that, you're actually engaging more of your senses, more of your intelligences, than if you just read and tried to work. There are some other techniques that photo reading incorporates, like mind mapping. There's a concept called super dipping and skimming. These are all interesting and useful, but in our course, we've actually eliminated the need for many of them because we're doing the activation for you. So unlike someone that's photo reading on their own, we've built a course on the same foundational principles so that the material that you read or photo read, you're getting the most activation from. Another of the tips that Paul talks about is to maintain expectations. He says that after the first few sessions, when you've activated, it's common to feel like you don't know it all. He says, even though you think you should. And he said, for some people, that's something of an emotional crisis. And if you let your expectations drop, then your performance drops to match those expectations. On the other hand, and we know this to be true in a variety of settings, keeping your expectations high, your performance then rises to match that. The path of mastery basically says that you should love the plateaus where it feels like not much is happening, because in fact that's when it's all really happening behind the scenes. If you keep on using the techniques, progress follows. And I see this constantly with students who tell me that they're really struggling early on with photo reading, and then sort of miraculously their essay writing begins to improve and their performance on the practice multi-state starts to get better, and they start saying, well, how in the world did that happen? Well, the expectation started to grow. The reality that photo reading was working started to sink in, and the more confidence they got in photo reading and the process, the better their results. And so it's one of the ways that we've turned people who are perpetually failing on the bar into passing, and it's an important piece. And certainly part of what we talk about at Celebration Bar Review all the time with expectations and words and worlds. Again, in our live masterclass, I'll spend more time talking about that. And then the last tip that I want to share of Paul's with you is that he says you should use a new model of memory. He says rather than trying to recall what you've read, go for a sense of recognition. And recognition, he describes as a doorway to further recall. It's a way for your conscious mind to call on your unconscious mind for the deeper memory stores. Becoming relaxed and confident that your mind has learned this information allows you to connect your conscious mind to the guidance of your inner mind. And that allows you to achieve your purpose, which in our case is to answer more questions correctly or to have a better sense of the law if you're doing an essay. Photo reading is really remarkable. It's a life changer. People who photo read for the bar exam have come back and told me in interviews, some of which we've had up on our site with them after they've passed the bar, that not only do they use it for the bar exam, but now they photo read at work, or they've taught their kids how to photo read. And it's a life changer, and it's a miraculous piece of I think, methodology that if you're willing to take the chance and try it, will be a game changer for you. Now, do you have to use photo reading to be successful on the bar exam? Absolutely not. But frankly, I don't know why anyone presented with this information wouldn't use it. It's a remarkable opportunity to read so much more than you ever could. And as a photo reader, I'm able to go through 5 to 10 books a week. I couldn't have done that in a month before. So I love photo reading. I photo read everything, not just for the bar review. And I would encourage you to check it out. If you want to know more, you can go to celebrationbarreview.com/star, STAR, and we've got some information about photo reading for you there. And we'll have some links in our show notes as well for you to find out more, and to invite you to integrate that in with your bar review course with us. Well, I hope this has been helpful for you. I appreciate you taking the time. Anxious to get your comments and feedback. If you're already a photo reader, let us know. If you're in our Extra Mile Facebook group, big thread conversation about photo reading going on currently, and I invite you to be part of that if you're in the group. So with that, I'm going to wrap up here with just a few concluding words. Well, I hope you found today's podcast valuable, and if you did, I'd like to invite you to subscribe to the Extra Mile podcast. You can do that in one of two ways. You can go to iTunes and subscribe there, or you can go to our website, celebrationbarreview.com, click on the podcast link at the top of the page, where you'll find our show notes and all the past episodes, and you can subscribe from there. Now, if you'd like even more of the Extra Mile than we offer in these podcasts, I want to also invite you to join our private Facebook group called The Extra Mile. This is a community of current and past successful bar takers who've come together for advice, support, information, and some terrific resources. We've put together the Extra Mile as a monthly paid subscription offering. And I want to just share with you some of what's involved and some of the benefits you're going to receive when you join the Extra Mile Facebook group. First, and I think most significantly, you'll receive access to our popular economical Bar U course as part of the membership. Bar U provides digital lectures and outlines and selected questions for 7 state bar exams: California, New York, Florida, Texas, Georgia, New Jersey, in addition to all of the uniform bar exam jurisdictions and the multi-state bar exam. Now, membership in Bar U alone would normally cost you about $100 a month, but it's free with your paid subscription to the Facebook group. And I think you'd find this a great way to just have access to substantive current material, lectures, and outlines for all of the subjects that are on the bar exam. In addition to that, members of our Facebook group receive access to our online writing workshop course that contains 4 lectures on essay writing, plus sample question and model answers. That course sells for $99.95 all by itself, so definitely a value when you're part of the Facebook group. And all of our Facebook group members will receive free seats for 3 brand new masterclasses we're doing this year. These are being offered to the public actually for sale for $50 per class, but they're free to our Facebook group members. The topics of these new masterclasses, which are presented in conjunction with our partners at Learning Strategies, will be on abundance for life and living the law of attraction and rapid reading made easy. There are 3 topics that I've extensively taught as ways to enhance and improve your bar exam scores and your study, and I think you're going to find them really valuable. In addition to all of that, our Facebook members will get my proprietary exam predictions for each exam, and you'll receive our exclusive video countdown leading up to the upcoming bar exam. On top of all of that, and maybe even most significantly, you'll get the support and the advice that comes from a community of people who really want to see you succeed on the bar. Our past bar students who've been successful have generously agreed to come on and offer their insights and advice. And I come into the site on a daily basis to offer additional resources and to do Q&A. So really encourage you to check this out. In the show notes, you'll find the link to sign up for this Facebook group. And one other thing about it, there's a 5-day free trial, so you can actually sign up and not have anything charged until you've been able to experience it for yourself. But when you take all of the benefits together, it's several $100s worth of resources available for only $77 a month. There's no requirement to continue the subscription. It's every 30 days until you cancel. So really invite you to join us there on the Extra Mile. Well, that's it for today. Thanks for being with us, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Thanks for listening to the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers at www.celebrationbarreview.com.